Mr. Earl is started out running for governor, and it's been up and down.
It's been an adventure.
Adventure. All right, excellent. So he's going to talk to you for a little bit, then he's going to let you ask questions. Rare. Anyway, here you go. This is Charlie Earl, and at the count of three, if you could all give us your name, then we'll all know each other. So that's 1, 2, 3. Glenn, now
Charlie.
you know everybody in the room.
Hey, good to meet you all. So anyway, I'm Charlie Earl. I'm the Libertarian candidate for governor. Well, I was. I'm waiting for the Sixth Circuit Court to decide whether I still am or not at this point in time. I should begin by prefacing that a little bit, saying I was with the GOP for 40 years. I served in the State House of Representatives back in the 80s. I was a representative from first the 82nd, then the 80th district when they tried to redistrict me and get rid of me. Vern Rife was the Speaker of the House then. You know, good old country boy from Scioto County. And I was a member of the GOP caucus. At the time, there were 62 Democrats and 37 Republicans in the House. And then the second term, we moved up to 43, so it was 56 to 43. But I was part of what we called the Caveman Caucus. John Ashbrook sort of was our mentor and our leader, if any of you remember John. We lost him in '84. A good conservative constitutionalist person. And there were a group of us, just a small group. I think our maximum number at any one time was 13 that met together to try to get some sense back into what was happening in Columbus, let alone Washington. And we were always in the minority within the minority. Well, in 1984, I decided not to run again because I felt I was just spinning my wheels down there. I owned 2 radio stations at the time. I had 2 young children, and it was just time to let other people do the frustrating work of sitting through committee meetings where your vote never counted. And so I didn't run again in '84, and I probably could have won 70% of the vote because there was this fellow running for re-election named Reagan. Okay? In fact, I emceed part of his whistle stop tour through Western Ohio. And so I got to introduce him and meet the president on the train. Got a pair of cufflinks. So it was pretty neat. It was a great experience. But I chose not to run again in '84. So that was 30 years ago. One of the senators I served with was a young, fiery, idealistic guy named Kasich. Another senator I served with was a young, hard charger named DeWine. A House member that I served with was a lefty, but an honest and sincere one named Sherrod Brown. And one of the members of my Caveman Caucus, one of the hardcore conservatives who felt government was out of control 30 years ago, was a gentleman named Bill Batchelder. I've been out of government for 30 years. They've been in government for 30 years. You know, one small window of John's life where he went out and made big money with a bank that failed, or an investment bank. They're back into government. And what I've seen are some people who had solid, true, idealistic values who, because they've spent so much time in office, they've come to believe that government is the answer. They're living in a bubble. And not only do they believe that government is the answer, they believe they are the ones who control and have the answer. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous. The reason I left the GOP, I was living in Pennsylvania. My wife and I, we spent some time in Pennsylvania and Illinois till we came back to Ohio to be with our aging parents and our grandchildren. But I was living in Pennsylvania, and I was working in a campaign for a Senate candidate in the Republican primary named Pat Toomey. And this is 2004. Pat was running against a guy named Arlen Specter. Yeah, the third most liberal man in the Senate. So-called Republican. It was a tight race. The polls showed us with about 3 weeks away from the election, the primary election, the polls showed us within 3 points. Now, Pennsylvania is described politically as Pittsburgh to the west, Philly to the east, and Alabama in the middle. And we hadn't worked Alabama yet. When you're behind, when you don't have the money the other side does, you got to go where the people are first. You know, and then you go where they're further apart. And we were just getting ready to work Alabama when Air Force One flies into Philly Airport. The stairs go down. Out walks the President of the United States, George W. Bush, and Mr. Conservative Senator Rick Santorum. And they endorse Earl Inspector. I'd had misgivings about the way the party had been going for years, starting in 1980s. But at that moment, at that precise moment, I understood that party meant more than principle. Because Earl Inspector did win the primary, he did win the general election, and he finally did the only honest thing of his life and became a Democrat. Because he became a Republican back in Philly so he could win the attorney's office, the prosecuting attorney's office for Philly. He was a Democrat before that, but Republicans didn't have a candidate, and so he switched parties to become a Republican. And my heart was broken. Now, I'd never expected George W. Bush to be a true conservative. You know, No Child Left Behind, that kind of stuff. But I didn't expect him to go off to the dark side that quickly, that fast, and that blatantly. And Rick Santorum, then I started doing some research. I always thought Rick was a good, solid conservative guy, but he loves big government. And that told me that when the conservative standard bearer and a, quote, conservative president are big government status and love government solutions to everything, the party's too far gone. So I left. I left. I wandered in the wilderness for a couple of years, and I realized, I'm a slow learner, I realized that you can't have political rallies in a phone booth, and one vote doesn't win much. That going it alone was not a way to go. So I started looking around for a new home. I looked at the Constitution Party, and while I agreed with most of their platform, they just had no really footprint in Ohio. I looked at a number of other parties, and they're all over the place. But I finally came to the Libertarian Party, and this is why I, as a born-again, pro-life Christian, baptized a Baptist, glad to see a baptistry. Sarah Palin's going to come use. No, we can't. She had an interesting comment, if you haven't heard. And by the way, I live about 6.5 miles from the biggest mosque in Ohio, so she might want to come up to my neighborhood. Anyway, how could I justify being a libertarian and having my personal beliefs of faith and life that I do, among other things? Well, the bottom line is I believe God is the author of liberty, and I believe God when he tells me he's the author of liberty. And the way he justifies that liberty or explains it to us is that we have an option to choose his way or not. That's liberty. You can choose the right way or the wrong way. I came to the conclusion that the most important aspect of what our founders and framers established was liberty. You know, Patrick Henry, George Mason, Sam Adams, they didn't fight to create another England or another big government. Yeah, Hamilton and some of those clowns did, but the documents supported the people who wanted liberty, freedom to choose. And I like to tell people quite often, liberty is the right to be stupid. Okay? Because when we make a mistake and do something stupidly, we have an opportunity to learn from it and recover without hurting many others. When government makes a mistake and does something stupid, they need more money. And they need to grow the program bigger. So I think for the health of America and for our well-being and for our own personal liberty and for our fiscal well-being, we're better off having 315 million individually stupid people than having one massive, stupid government, because it's less costly in the end. I also came to the conclusion, by the way, I have a Bible course from Jerry Falwell School, Liberty University. Home study course, I did that. But I also have 8 years of college, so forgive me. That's my one weakness. But anyway, I know for a fact that government has no heart, has no mind, and has no soul. Why on earth would any thinking rational believer or any thinking rational secularist want to turn the most important aspects of your lives over to something that has no heart, no mind, and no soul? I've got a mindless brother-in-law, and I sure wouldn't put him in charge of anything. But yet we seem to, as a culture, as a society, and this is where people like you are changing this mentality and changing this attitude, we seem to give government a personality that we wish it had, and it doesn't. Glenn was just talking about his little escapade with the carport. See, that's mindless, soulless stupidity government. I've got a similar story. I used to do a lot of writing until I started this campaign. I wrote, I called them columns. They're really blogs and rants. But anyway, I wrote about 3 a week, about 1,000 words each. And 2 of them that I wrote were called The Stadium and the Outhouse. When I graduated from high school, I never played a home football game. I played 4 years of high school football, never had a home field game. In fact, our homecoming games were at our #1 rivals field, and that hurt. That hurt. But anyway, the year after I graduated, my dad started the impetus to get all the farmers. I grew up in a small town called McCutcheonville out by Tiffin, Ohio. To get all the farmers in the community together, and they built a football stadium. I mean, they graded the field. They went out someplace and bought the bleachers and brought them back in their farm trucks. They used their manure loaders and all that and lifted the things up. They set the light poles. They climbed up and hung the lights. They built a concession stand and a ticket booth, and the total cost was $20,000. The stands are still there. Of course, the field's still there. Now, they've replaced the concession stand, and they've done some upgrades and things over the years, because I graduated in 1964. That's 50 years ago. But for $20,000, they built a stadium that stands today. When my wife and I left Pennsylvania, we went to Illinois for a couple of years. She's in the big Fortune 500 companies, and you know, I was a simple college teacher, so we went wherever the big bucks were, so I followed her all over the place. Anyway, when we were in Illinois, my wife was with the local women's club of a little town called Rochester, which is where we lived, across the lake from Springfield, the state capital. I got to tell you about Springfield. When they were in session, all the guys from Chicago would come down, and all the politicians from East St. Louis would come up, and the stench was overpowering. Anyway, so she's in this women's club at Rochester, and as government is wont to do, they turned an abandoned railway into a bicycle walking path, so all the yuppies would get the taxpayers to provide their recreational opportunities for them. And this thing was like 30 miles long, and it had no restrooms. So the good ladies of Rochester, which is about halfway down this trail, decided, you know, it'd be a good idea if we put a waste station there and a water fountain so the people will have a place to stop on their way down, up and down. What a wonderful thing we could do. See, I told you about the stadium. This is the outhouse. Like Glenn, they had to have architectural drawings, $30,000. They had to have prevailing wage. And they couldn't put in a single stall. They had to have 2 stalls. And I'm pretty sure that if they had to do it today, they would need 3 for other. And they got all done with that thing. It was $90,000. $20,000 for a football stadium is 50 years old. And I realize inflation is part of it, but the real difference was people went out and worked and got it done without a bunch of people interfering, without the government, and a $90,000 outhouse. What's wrong? What's wrong? Pardon? You know, I never went in it. I had a difficulty with the whole project, actually. The minute she came home from the meeting and said, we got to have a $30,000 architectural fee, I said, you're nuts. So I backed off. I believe that we have two issues facing us, whether we're coming from the Republican camp, the Democrat camp, the Libertarian camp, or whatever. In fact, 50% of Ohio's voters are unaffiliated. Means they don't trust either party or any party. Now, admittedly, a good portion of them are people they registered at the county fair or the ice cream festival, and they never seen the inside of a voting booth in their lives. They just signed to get rid of these people or whatever. But still, a significant number of registered voters in Ohio are fed up with the whole system the way it's being conducted today. And I believe there's a movement today strictly for liberty. That's the one thing the rest of us can agree on, is that no matter what they do and how they do it, they're infringing upon our rights in one way, shape, or another. And we got to stop it. What made me decide to get back into politics when we moved back to Ohio was I was sitting on my patio holding my little grandson, who was just an infant at the time. It was the first time they let Grampy watch him alone. Usually that was, no, Grampy would want to teach him to play basketball, and he can't even crawl yet. So I was holding my little grandson sitting on my patio, and I have a beautiful little farm. I got a 3/4 of an acre pond. It's just gorgeous out there, and cornfields beyond me, and the woods over there, and I've got a pair of bald eagles that nest in that woods. And when the water was low, they'd come and eat my fish, and I was tempted to break another law, but I didn't. But it's just gorgeous, and it's been a dream of mine. I grew up on a dairy farm. I grew up on the back end of 60 head of milking brown Swiss. I was 14 before I knew cows had heads. That's not quite true. I know all politicians lie, so I had to be somewhat typical anyway tonight. But I grew up on a dairy farm, and I've been off the farm as a college teacher, as a radio broadcaster, spent some time in television, but I don't have a face for that. And I missed the dirt. I missed being on my hands and knees, thinking. I missed it. And so my dream was, when we came back to Ohio, to be near our aging parents and our children and grandchildren, that we're going to get some acreage. So I got my little dream. That's beautiful. But I'm holding this little infant. And I know how hard his parents, my son and daughter-in-law, are struggling. I mean, they're a decade behind where Pat and I were at the same age. I mean, if you're talking fiscally, financially, opportunity, all those things. They're a decade behind that. And I'm looking down at him. This kid doesn't have a chance. He doesn't have a chance. He's going to be paying 80% taxes if the whole thing doesn't collapse before that, and we're all living off of bartered corn and wheat. He doesn't have a chance. Grampy's got to get back on the saddle. I owe it to him. I owe it to him to get back out there and do what I can to get our freedom back, to get government off our backs, to try to get some sanity back into here. But I can't do it alone. So anyway, so that was the impetus that got me back in to the political game after a 30-year hiatus. So I stayed involved. I got involved in campaigns like the Toomey campaign and others. I wrote copy for people. I did voiceover commercials and stuff like that. But I didn't have a gut investment. It was time for a gut investment. All in. From the toes to the top of my head. All in. And it's for liberty. We'll argue about how to divvy up that liberty later on. The bottom line is we got to get the monster off our backs now. So why run for governor? Why not run for state rep? Well, with all due respect, There's still 98 others down there. And maybe 5 or 6 of them are decent people, or maybe we can get a dozen in, okay? What I need are 35 to sustain every veto. Why governor? First of all, let me say, and I hope you don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I think the country's too far gone to save. The only way we're going to do it is restore the states under the original plan and tell the federal government, that little river that goes from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati, that side's yours. We don't care what you do. This side's ours. Now, if you got friends in Parkersburg, move them over. Out of Ohio. If it's not in Article 1, Section 8, we refuse to comply. But Charlie, we'll be giving up all that government money. Yeah, right. We send it to them. They take their 30% cut off the top. They make us beg for it to get it back. And they attach bungee cords and strings to it. What kind of sense does that make? None. So the state of Ohio's got to stand up for Ohioans. I think we are perfectly positioned as a state to save the country. California's big enough, but too crazy. New York's big enough, but too far gone. Texas can't talk about saving the country without seceding. Okay? I mean, they still have that right. That pretty much leaves Florida and us. Well, half of us live in Florida. No. Anyway, as big states who have enough clout to be a leader in the movement to get our country back, state by state by state by state. We are positioned to do that. We used to be the heart of it all. We're the crossroads of America. You know, if we just tore down the rusting industrial buildings we have in this state and sold the scrap iron, we could fund anything we wanted. But let's do better than that. Let's rebuild them. Let me tell you a couple of philosophical positions that go along with liberty for me. I don't believe there should be any corporate taxes at all because they're pass-through taxes. Any business person or any industrial person or wholesaler will tell you they add that into the cost of doing business and put it on the end of the product. So who pays it? You do. The end consumer. So why go through the sham? Let's eliminate it at the beginning. Zero, nada. The only people who would pay corporate taxes would be companies that are not domiciled in Ohio would have to pay the corporate franchise tax. In other words, if your home office is in Atlanta or Dallas or Denver, you're still paying the corporate franchise tax. If your home office is in Marietta or Columbus or Cincinnati or Torch, you don't pay the corporate franchise tax. No corporate taxes. Then when they do their calculations and their pricing, they're going to be 3 to 4% better than they were before, companies and so forth. That makes us more competitive nationally and internationally. Okay? It's going to help. You're going in 3 to 4% advantage. You know, you might have a leg up when you compete against other companies and so forth from other states. So let's do that. I also think the personal income tax is immoral. Nobody owns your labor but you. God asks you to share a portion of that with Him. The first fruits, the first 10%. God only wants 10%. Well, I mean, He wants more if you're willing and open-hearted and wants to do it. But He only says, you know, I recommend 10%. Government wants more than that, and they want it first. God takes second place to government. Government takes it out first, and then what's left, you pay God out of that. Nobody should own your labor. We have a 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment that deals with that. Who owns you? Who owns you? The income tax means somebody owns you because you go out and work. What? Did you celebrate tax-free day here in Washington County? April 21st was National Tax-Free Day. I think April 17th was Ohio Tax-Free Day. That's when everybody's taxes basically were paid off for the year, and the rest of the time they could work for themselves. Well, that was a joke, because spending-free day is July 16th. Spending-free day is July 16th. So that means everything from April 21st to July 16th is borrowed money. But nevertheless, who owns you? So I think the income tax is immoral. But Charlie, you can't get away with the income tax. How will the state survive? The income tax generates 28.7% of Ohio's budget. If we eliminated that 28.7% in spending, our budget would be equal to the budget of 2003. I'm not asking you to go back to 1892 here, folks, or back to 1914, or back to 1946. 2003. That's doable. That's functional. We can do it. We can do it and eliminate the personal income tax in Ohio. Feds will still want their bite, but we could fight that along the line too. But why can't we do that? Imagine if we had no income tax and no corporate tax. You know, people might even come to Washington County. One of the tragedies in this state is the demographic we're losing the most frequently is about that 32 to 45 age group. Because the opportunities don't exist anymore like they used to. I would ask, many of you in here are a little bit younger than me. How many of you have grandchildren that live out of state? Breaks your heart, doesn't it? To get to see them as often as you want to? That's why we move back. Twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. In the beginning, it was 6 times a year, then it was 4 times a year. Then they got in Little League and soccer. Yeah, exactly. Are you going to make it for Christmas? If we had the jobs and the opportunities here, more of our grandbabies would be with us. But Ohio has not become a destination point. It's an exit point. And so we've got to economically turn it around. But the best way to do that, not just cutting taxes, but it's freedom. Get and require Ohio to obey the Ohio Constitution. We don't do that now. You know, the controlling board is not supposed to implement major programs. Especially major programs that are going to drive us into spending way beyond our means in about 3 to 4 years, such as Medicaid expansion. The controlling board was not set up to implement things like Common Core, which dumbs down our kids and gives the federal government more control over how they learn and what they learn. See, in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States, I swear I've never saw the word education. Never saw it. Why are we even considering it? So this brings me to my final point about why I believe we need courage in state government, because we don't have it now. The state government of Ohio, and with my former friends in office, I still thought they were friends, but they haven't been real nice to me lately. With my former friends in office, have become nothing more than big government light, Ohio version. They've become nothing more than enablers of a federal system that's addicted to power, and they just enable it. Give us some of the money, please, give us money, give us money. Yeah, we'll implement that, we'll do anything, we'll spend the state into bankruptcy. Just give us a few shekels so that after we're out of office, somebody else has to hold the bag. That is irresponsible. It is immoral. It is immoral. So anyway, I feel my purpose is to rebuild the spine of Ohio. That's it. And as I explained, I need 35 House members and 12 senators to veto every piece of legislation that doesn't conform to the Constitution of Ohio and the United States. I will pull an Obama, but a legal one. I will tell the feds, no, you can't do that here. It's not within the Constitution of the United States. And if your people try to implement that unconstitutional law in Ohio, you'll be arrested by the OHP. Because I can tell them to do that. And the only way they can stop that is if the legislature rises up and says, you can't do that, we insist, and so they pass new laws. If that's the case, then folks, I will hand out the torches and the pitchforks, and we'll take it back. We'll take it back. They've got to start listening, and they don't. I was telling some friends earlier tonight, there is a thing about running for office. You've got to be a narcissist. But to serve, you have to be humble. And we don't have that mixture anymore, you know? We get all narcissists. And after they've been in there for so long, they become arrogant narcissists. I promise you, win, lose, or draw, I'll be humble. This is my last rodeo. I want to serve, do the job, tick off as many people as I have to, and go back to my farm. I'm not running for president. I'm not running for the U.S. Senate. I'm not running for anything else. Look at me. I can't live that long. I want to get my state back under control for my kids and grandkids, and I want to get this state back under control for the nation, to lead it back, because we're positioned to do it. And that's all I want. I want liberty for Ohioans. Let's be constitutional. If we don't like the Constitution, those brilliant guys and the framers gave us a method to change it. We've had 27 amendments, 26 effective, because 18 and 21 canceled each other. That's one about every 9 years. Folks, that's not impossible. Now, oh, it's so tough to change the Constitution. When you're making a major change to your fundamental document of your nation, your set of principles, your foundation, every 9 years, that's pretty speedy. That's what they had in mind. It should be a thoughtful process. We should weigh it through. Not jump into anything, but on the other hand, not so impossible it can't be done. So if you want to change it, go for it. Just do it the constitutional way. Same way in Ohio. Obey the Constitution. So, I'm Charlie Earl. I'd appreciate your support. I got some Mickey Mouse brochures back there because we're still fighting our battles. But I'm open to anything you might ask, and let's win one for the future. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question about our Constitution.
Yes, ma'am.
People in this room worked our buns off twice to get on the ballot the question of how Ohio could be excluded from Obamacare.
Right.
It passed.
66%.
Nothing ever happened.
66% in the state, in every county, which is historic.
What happened to it?
They
No
ignored it.
politician's ever been
See,
able to answer that.
Let me tell you a little side. That's one of the reasons I'm not real excited about an Article 5. Because the National Convention, what does it matter what you do? They'll ignore it. What it means is you got to elect leaders who say it's liberty first and foremost. Don't ever vote for somebody that says I want smaller government. You've been doing that for years. Smaller doesn't mean constitutional. Smaller means we're raising the budget 4%, but I held out for 3%. And we've been doing that for years. We've been sucking onto those worms for years, and we've been hooked. They must pledge to you. Ask for blood if you want. They must pledge to you that they will obey and stick with the Constitution. Well, sure it is. But they never have to make that pledge before then, and who listens to the oath? You're right. In fact, what we need is we need some legislation here or a referendum, and I would lead the ball on this, to allow impeachment and recall. Now, it could be a nightmare. I mean, these things could be going on forever, you know, as they jump over the line and do stupid stuff. But I think it's time. We can no longer tolerate almost good because it's a little bad. And a little bad gets worse and worse, and it builds on itself. It's cumulative.
Let's take another question.
I'm sorry. I get carried away.
We didn't finish that one. Can you answer it for me? What did happen to that?
They ignored it.
How can they do that?
They did it. The Supreme Court, who is in the, okay, as a former GOPer, let me tell you, it's downright dangerous to have all 5 constitutional offices, supermajorities in the House and the Senate, and the Supreme Court controlled by one party, because they feel they can do anything they want to.
And did.
And did.
So they just plunked their magic finger and we all went away on it?
Yeah, well, it's not binding. The Supreme Court said it wasn't binding. That's because you don't count. Thank you. Well, it's...
Next question. We have where? Oh. I thought you were running. Here you asking a question.
Well,
You know everything.
as a libertarian, abortion, gay marriage, legal marijuana. Where you at?
Well, I'm a pro-life, born-again Baptist. Now, as a libertarian, as an individual, the party official stance is neutral on all things because they think there are some things government shouldn't control, and let me explain to you why. First of all, there's a movement afoot to make gay marriage legal, right? Exactly. What happens when it is? Now, this is government sanctioning of same-sex marriage. In other words, government says it's legal, and you will honor it, and you will do everything associated with it. Then if you don't want to sell flowers to the wedding or don't want to sell a cake to the wedding, you're charged with the discrimination, okay, and all those. Why does government have any control about who we love? Why does my golden retriever need a license and my wife and I need a license? Why should government tell us who to marry? Marriage is a contract between 2 people and God Almighty if they invite him in. That's the way it should be. If government was out of the way, then we have the freedom to talk to people who disagree with us on these issues openly without being accused of hate crimes and discrimination. We can discriminate if we don't want to associate. Some churches preach a separate people. You can't do that now. When government gets involved, they mess it up. Let me give you another example, and this is a hypothetical. If the Congress of the United States were suddenly to pass a late-term abortion bill, a partial birth abortion bill banning it, I imagine most of you would be turning cartwheels. But I guarantee you that at the same time, they would increase funding for Planned Parenthood because that's the way they do things. 80% of the ag bill is food stamps. So when government's in it, they're going to mess it up. Remember, no heart, no mind, no soul. Now let's take it another step. I'm a Baptist. Another step. If we have a Christian governor, can he be a Mormon? If we have a Christian government, can it be Mormon? Can it be Jehovah's Witness? Can it be Church of Scientology? See, there's where we run into trouble because some of these churches, quote, call themselves Christian churches and don't necessarily follow what we would call fundamental Christian doctrine. But then we're going to need a panel or a group of decision makers deciding who's Christian and who's not. And we're right back into the box we are today. Because government decides what's fair and what's not. And government has no heart, no mind, no soul. I think God gave us liberty. I believe, personally, fervently, I don't trust government at all to make the right decisions. I think turn us loose and we work on our families and friends, and it's hearts and minds that matter, not government laws and edicts. That's why I can be a libertarian and be and this is what I went through those years in the wilderness. I really went through that because it was a difficult thing for me to accept. But official libertarian doctrine is to stay out of that. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so what's the point? I mean,
What I'm saying is, in that, and in the Democratic docket, abortion is fine.
it's encouraged.
So, as a libertarian, are you going to follow the libertarian doctrine, or are you going to follow the doctrine of the Bible?
I want to get the government out of it. If we go to the Constitution aspects of the government and do what the government should be doing, the minimalist things the government should be doing, the rest of it is left up to we the people. Flashback to 1973. You were alive then. Barely. You're just a kid. 1973, Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade was law, established law of the land. If that hadn't been in the federal marketplace, if the states had resisted and stood up for their own rights to make their own decisions, 27 states at that time banned abortion. 27. Now, flash forward to today, 40 years later. I'm not sure we would still have 27 states that banned it, because some would weasel and weaken, but we would still have some states that did. And other states might have restrictions or limitations beyond what the federal government says you can have. In fact, you're going to be paying for Obamacare for the rest of your life and your grandchildren's lives, and it's mandated in some aspects of that. Get the government out of it. Let hearts and minds, let people of faith, let people of conviction make the decisions among ourselves, because when the government gets in it, it has the power of force, and it will use it to force you to go their way. So that's how I came to that conclusion. Bottom line is, let's get back to liberty and constitutionalism, then let's argue about that. But if that's going to be the issue that determines whether or not we get rid of big government, that's going to make a bigger fight than we need. Let's just get rid of big government, and then let's deal with this stuff. Let's deal with it state by state, which is where it ought to be. Where it ought to be. That's the way it was designed by the framers. Okay. I moved on.
Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Earl, for your wonderful talk tonight. I appreciated it. I have a question. How in God's green earth are we ever going to elect a libertarian when it seems to me like the libertarians are going to take just enough of the vote away from the conservative, if you want to call it that, Republican Party, to assure the election of the Democrats? It seems to me we're
Okay.
shooting ourselves
Oh, I've
in
got
the
a perfect
foot.
answer for you, my friend. Who's controlled the legislature for the last 2 years? Republicans. Overwhelming majorities in the House and the Senate, right? Yes, wait a minute. The Republican Party. In the Senate, they got 23-10 in the Senate. I'm talking about the Ohio. Forget the federal government. In Ohio, overwhelming majorities in the House and the Senate. Let's say Ed Fitzgerald or Ted Strickland were governor. And Ted Strickland says, you know, I want to expand Medicaid in Ohio. Those clowns in the legislature would have fought him tooth and nail. They would have beat him up and down the walls. They would have said the people passed forbidding Obamacare 66% statewide, all 88 counties, and they would have fought him to the wall. But one of their own says, I want to do it. Yeah, John, go ahead. So you're worried about a Democrat becoming governor? Listen, this is hard for me to say. 40 years in the GOP and a small government constitutionalist, but in some cases it might be better. In the sense that maybe, excuse me, Pastor, maybe that legislature will grow a set. Well, I know, you can disagree, and I have no problem with that. But see, I've known John Kasich, and I've seen him for what he's become. And I can't take it anymore. Sure.
Well, two actually. You mentioned you're not for the Convention of States then?
No, because I don't. First of all, who appoints the delegations? State legislatures.
And you just
Who makes
mentioned
up the state legislatures?
You just mentioned that.
Politicians. They aren't going to appoint the most radical members of their assembly. They're going to appoint the most esteemed and respected members of their assembly. Those are going to be compromises that go along to get along, guys. And then whatever they come out with will be watered down, and what does it matter? Congress will ignore it anyway. They don't follow the Constitution now. They don't follow the amendments now. The Second Amendment says no infringement. They're consistently infringing. Consistently. The First Amendment says freedom of speech. But you can't say this. You can't say that. You can't do this. What does it matter? It has to be done by the states. I mean, okay, go ahead and do it, but don't expect any positive result really to come out of it. It's going to get a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement going, but the bottom line is it's not going to have a real value, in my view, given the fact who's in charge. These people don't want to give up their power. The only way to get power from these clowns is to take it.
It's the best defense I've heard of that so far.
Oh, thank you.
But
Mark Levin doesn't like me much.
Yeah. My real question is, you've talked fundamentals basically, but other than the power of veto or having enough legislators to sustain that veto, the monster of spending.
Yeah.
Because I would step on some toes. I'm going to step on some toes, but I guarantee there are people in this room that want their program, that want something from the government.
Yeah,
Everybody
I know.
wants something.
Yeah.
And that's you're talking about having a hard time getting on the ticket because of the establishment. But the other thing you'd be fighting, even if you succeed there, is everybody wants something.
Sure.
And how
But
do you
see,
fight
I'm not
that?
afraid at this stage, with no political career in mind, with no next step, okay? I don't care who I tick off. My bottom line is to stop the train. And if things work out and things work perfectly and everything falls into place, maybe turn it around. But my bottom line is to stop the madness. And I don't care who I tick off. I might be the first governor in Ohio history to be marched out of the governor's office in a pair of orange coveralls surrounded by federal marshals. But that's okay. See, because I've got nothing at stake other than the people I love and the state I love, the state I was born in, grew up in. I don't have to please anybody else. I don't expect anybody to erect a monument in my honor. I don't want a post office named after me. I've got nothing to lose. And so I believe because of that, I've got everything to win. Anything we can get done is a positive, because the people who are there now and the people who want to be there now on either party don't have the courage to do what it takes to get the job done. Don't have the courage.
That would be him.
Remember, Earl is a four-letter word. Sorry, Pastor. Oh, so is veto a four-letter word. So just remember all those four-letter words that run through your mind when you see something stupid in government. We're on the same path then.